Florence was 22 years old when fate placed a wedding crown upon her head and changed her future to a man who did not want her. Years earlier, she had been the cherished daughter of Lord Edmund, a respected noble whose name carried honor throughout the United Kingdom. Then everything had changed. Her father had been accused of treason against the crown. The trial had been swift, the verdict merciless, and the execution public. Within days, the title was stripped away, their estate in Yorkshire was confiscated, and their family was cast into disgrace. The country remembered a traitor. Florence remembered a loving father who had taught her kindness, honesty, and courage. After his death, poverty settled over their lives like a relentless winter. Florence and her mother moved into a modest cottage on the edge of a crowded town in Lancashire. Her mother's health steadily declined, weakened by grief and illness. With no servants and no fortune remaining, Florence became everything her household needed. She spent her mornings sewing gowns for wealthy merchants' wives, her fingers often bleeding from endless stitching, but she never complained. During the afternoon, she delivered finished garments throughout town. At night, life was difficult, but Florence endured it with quiet determination. Then the royal summons arrived. The letter bore the seal of the crown. Florence stared at it for several minutes before opening it. Such letters rarely brought good news to families carrying the stain of disgrace. Her hands trembled as she read. The king had arranged her marriage to Duke Adrian. Florence knew the name immediately. Everyone did. Adrian was among the most powerful men in the United Kingdom. At 29 years old, he controlled vast lands, commanded immense wealth, and held considerable influence at court. Nobles respected him, rivals feared him, and stories described him as disciplined, intelligent, and utterly unforgiving. No one described him as warm. Florence could not understand why such a man would agree to marry her. When she showed the letter to her mother, tears filled the older woman's eyes. "This could save you," her mother whispered. Florence wanted to ask whether survival was worth entering a marriage without affection, but the answer was already visible in the frail woman lying before her. Bills were mounting, food was increasingly scarce, and opportunities for women with disgraced family names were limited. She accepted the arrangement. Weeks later, she traveled to the estate. The castle rose above the English countryside like a monument carved from stone and authority. Tall towers pierced the sky, guards lined the gates, and servants moved efficiently through halls larger than the entire cottage she had left behind. Florence felt small the moment she arrived. The feeling intensified when she finally met Adrian. He was undeniably handsome, with dark hair, sharp features, and steady grey eyes that seemed capable of measuring a person's worth within seconds. Unfortunately, those eyes revealed no enthusiasm when they settled upon her. He greeted her politely, nothing more. No smile touched his face, no curiosity softened his expression. To Adrian, she appeared to be another responsibility handed to him by political necessity. The wedding took place 3 days later. Nobles from across the United Kingdom gathered inside the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers illuminated polished marble floors. Musicians performed elegant melodies, while aristocrats displayed jewels worth more than Florence had earned in years. She wore the finest dress she could obtain, but it was still simple compared to the extravagant gowns surrounding her. Whispers followed her wherever she walked. "The traitor's daughter, how unusual. Why would the Duke agree to this?" Florence kept her head high despite every remark. She had learned long ago that dignity costs nothing. The banquet began after the ceremony. Hundreds of guests filled the hall. Laughter echoed beneath golden ceilings, and glasses clinked together in celebration. Then Adrian stood and the room gradually quieted. Florence turned toward him expecting a formal speech. Instead, his gaze drifted over her modest dress, and something cold entered his expression. When he spoke, his voice carried effortlessly through the hall. "I'm embarrassed to call you my wife." Silence crashed over the gathering. Every conversation stopped, every musician froze. Florence felt as though the floor had vanished beneath her feet. For one terrible moment, she could neither move nor breathe. Then came the whispers. Some guests looked shocked, others appeared entertained, and many simply stared. Humiliation burned through her chest, threatening to shatter the composure she had spent years building, yet she refused to cry before an audience, eager to witness her weakness. Slowly she rose from her seat, bowed her head without speaking a single word, and walked out of the ballroom. The whispers followed her like blades. That night alone, in an unfamiliar chamber, Florence finally allowed herself to weep. The marriage intended to rescue her family had become another prison. The following month settled into a painful routine. Adrian never repeated his public insult, but distance remained firmly between them. They shared meals only when protocol demanded it. and conversations rarely extended beyond necessity. He fulfilled his obligations as husband in name, while keeping his emotions locked behind impenetrable walls. The servants noticed. Most treated Florence with formal politeness, yet few offered genuine respect. Some delayed her requests. Others ignored her entirely, and their behavior reflected the example set by their master. Florence endured everything silently. Complaining would solve nothing. Instead, she focused her attention elsewhere. Each month, Adrian provided her with a generous allowance, suitable for a duchess. Rather than purchasing jewelry or luxurious gowns, Florence secretly directed much of the money towards struggling families throughout the duchy. A widow received funds to repair her roof, an elderly couple received firewood for winter, and several children obtained medicine their parents could not afford. Florence delivered help quietly, asking for neither recognition nor gratitude. To her, kindness was not a performance, it was a responsibility. As seasons passed, hardship among the local districts began drawing concern. Reports of growing unrest reached the castle regularly. Merchants complained of increasing desperation among laborers, and advisors urged caution. One evening, Adrian listened to yet another report before dismissing his counsel. Something about the rumors troubled him. He preferred facts over assumptions. The next day, disguised in ordinary clothing, the Duke left the castle alone to see the situation for himself. By sunset, he entered the town streets unnoticed. Within minutes, he began hearing a name repeated again and again, not his own, but Florence's. Adrian paused outside a crowded bakery, as an elderly man spoke with unmistakable gratitude. "The Duchess paid for my grandson's treatment." A woman nearby nodded immediately. "She saved my family during winter." Others joined the conversation, and more stories followed, filled with praise and admiration. Standing among strangers, Adrian listened in stunned silence as an image of his wife emerged that he had never bothered to see. For the first time since their marriage, the Duke began to wonder whether he had made a terrible mistake. Adrian remained outside the bakery long after the conversation ended. The evening air carried the scent of fresh bread and wood smoke, yet he barely noticed. The words he had heard echoed relentlessly through his mind. "The Duchess paid for my grandson's treatment. She saved my family during winter. Without her, we would have lost everything." None of those people knew he was standing among them. None realized they were speaking to the man who had spent months believing his wife possessed little worth beyond fulfilling a political arrangement. Curiosity drove him deeper into town. At every stop, he heard another story. A blacksmith spoke of medicine delivered when his daughter had fallen dangerously ill. An elderly widow described receiving enough money to survive the harshest winter in years. Several children proudly pointed toward a repaired orphanage roof and explained that the Duchess had paid for every board and nail. The admiration in their voices was unmistakable. More surprising still, no one spoke of Florence's generosity with the expectation of reward. She had never sought public praise, and most of her acts had remained hidden until grateful recipients shared them with others. For the first time since their marriage, Adrian felt ashamed. He had judged Florence by her family scandal, her modest appearance, and her quiet nature. Meanwhile, she had spent her days improving lives while asking for nothing in return. The realization followed him back to the castle. That evening, he found himself watching her from across the dining hall. Florence sat with her usual graceful posture, reading correspondence while eating a simple meal. She appeared calm, yet Adrian suddenly noticed details he had ignored before. There was weariness behind her smile, and there was loneliness in her eyes whenever she thought no one was looking. Most striking of all was the absence of bitterness. Despite everything he had done, she remained kind. The guilt settled heavily in his chest. Several days passed before he gathered the courage to approach her. Unfortunately, fate intervened first. One grey afternoon, a messenger arrived, carrying a sealed letter addressed to Florence. She accepted it politely and returned to her chambers. An hour later, she did not emerge. 2 hours passed, then 3. Concerned, one of the maids informed Adrian that the Duchess had cancelled her appointments and locked herself inside her room. Something about the situation troubled him. That evening, while passing through the corridor outside her chambers, he heard a sound that stopped him in his tracks, crying. Not soft tears, not restrained sniffles, heartbreaking sobs. The sound pierced through the door and struck him with unexpected force. Adrian stood frozen. Until that moment, Florence had always appeared composed. She smiled through humiliation, endured neglect without complaint, and faced hardship with remarkable dignity. Now the mask had shattered. He remained outside the door, listening helplessly as grief consumed her. A servant eventually informed him that the letter had contained news of her mother's death. The words hit him like a blow. Suddenly, everything made sense. Florence had already lost her father. Now she had lost the last member of her family. The loneliness she must have felt was unimaginable. Adrian raised his hand several times, intending to knock, yet each attempt ended with hesitation. What comfort could he possibly offer after months of cold indifference? Still, he could not leave. As darkness settled over the castle, he remained seated beside her door. Hours passed, the corridor grew silent, servants retired for the night, and candles burned low. Yet Adrian stayed. He listened as Florence's sobs gradually weakened into exhausted silence. For the first time in years, he questioned the man he had become. Power had taught him caution, and responsibility had taught him discipline, but neither had taught him compassion. Florence possessed that quality in abundance, and the realization humbled him. When dawn finally arrived, sunlight filtered through the corridor windows. Adrian rose slowly and approached the door. His voice was quiet when he spoke. Florence. Silence answered. He swallowed hard. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. Several moments passed, then the door opened slightly. Florence stood before him, pale and exhausted. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and grief remained visible across her face, yet she looked more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she nodded faintly. It was a small gesture, but to Adrian, it felt like a forgiveness he had not earned. Their relationship changed gradually after that morning. Neither attempted to erase the past. Instead, they began creating something new. Adrian started inviting Florence to join him for dinner. At first, conversation remained cautious. They discussed estate matters, books, and current events, but over time those discussions grew more personal. Florence shared memories of her childhood before her father's downfall, and Adrian described the pressures he had faced after inheriting his title at a young age. Each conversation revealed another layer hidden beneath their public identities. Florence discovered that Adrian's coldness was not cruelty alone. It was armor forged through years of responsibility and isolation. Adrian discovered that Florence's strength came not from privilege but from survival. The more he learned about her, the more he admired her. Spring arrived and the castle gardens burst into color. Walks became a regular part of their routine. They wandered among blooming roses and flowering trees while discussing everything from politics to childhood dreams. For the first time, Florence found herself laughing in Adrian's presence. The sound surprised them both, but soon it became familiar. The servants noticed the transformation. The Duke no longer ignored his wife. Instead, he sought her company. When guests visited, he invited Florence to remain beside him. When advisors dismissed her opinions, Adrian demanded they listen. Respect gradually spread throughout the household, not because Florence had changed, but because Adrian finally recognized the value that had always existed. As weeks passed, friendship deepened into something neither wished to name. Then came the storm. Dark clouds gathered one evening as they returned from inspecting several villages. Rain began falling before they reached the castle grounds, and they hurried toward a stone bridge crossing a swollen stream. The surface had become dangerously slick. Florence's foot slipped, and a startled cry escaped her lips. Before she could fall, Adrian lunged forward and caught her. His arm wrapped securely around her waist, and her hand instinctively grasped his shoulder. For several seconds, neither moved. Rain poured around them and water rushed beneath the bridge, yet the world seemed strangely still. Florence looked up. Their faces were only inches apart. She noticed tension in his expression, and his hand trembled slightly where it held hers. A faint smile touched her lips. "Why are you shaking?" she whispered. Adrian stared at her. Months ago, answering honestly would have been impossible. Now it felt necessary. A soft smile appeared on his face. "Because I've been trying not to fall in love with you." The confession hung between them. Florence's breath caught. Every painful memory, every shared conversation, every moment of growing trust, all of it led to this. Without another word, Adrian leaned forward and kissed her. The rain concealed everything except the truth they could no longer deny. When they finally returned to the castle, neither attempted to hide their happiness. Days turned into weeks, and their affection flourished openly. Flowers appeared in Florence's chambers. Adrian shortened meetings to spend time with her, and he even endured dance lessons, simply because she loved dancing. For the first time since their marriage, both believed the future might hold genuine happiness. Then one quiet afternoon, while organizing neglected records in the castle library, Adrian opened an ancient document case hidden behind several ledgers. Inside rested a sealed letter bearing the royal crest. Curious, he broke the seal. As his eyes moved across the faded words, the color drained from his face. By the time he reached the signature at the bottom, his hands were trembling. Everything he thought he knew about Florence's past had just been shattered. Adrian remained alone in the library long after sunset, the faded letter resting on the desk before him, its contents impossible to ignore and equally impossible to forget. He had read every line 3 times, hoping he had misunderstood something, but each reading only reinforced the truth. Lord Edmund had never betrayed the crown. The accusations that destroyed Florence's family had been fabricated. Attached to the letter were witness statements, financial records, and official testimony gathered during a secret royal investigation. Together, they formed undeniable proof that Florence's father had been framed by another nobleman seeking power and influence. Adrian's stomach tightened as his eyes settled once more on the final name. The man responsible was his uncle Victor, the same uncle who had guided him after his parents died, the same man he had trusted throughout his life, the same man whose advice had shaped many of his decisions. For years, Adrian had believed his uncle to be honorable. Now he understood that everything had been built upon a lie. He sank into a chair and pressed a hand against his forehead as images flooded his mind. Florence standing alone during their wedding banquet. Florence quietly enduring the servants' disrespect. Florence comforting strangers despite carrying her own pain. Florence crying behind a locked door after losing her mother. Every memory felt sharper now. The woman he loved had suffered because of his family's actions, and worse, he had added to her suffering. His cruel words at the wedding returned with brutal clarity. "I'm embarrassed to call you my wife." The sentence filled him with shame. How easily he had judged her, how confidently he had believed rumors and titles defined a person's worth. Meanwhile, Florence had demonstrated more dignity than anyone he had ever known. The hours passed unnoticed outside, as darkness settled over the estate. Inside the library, Adrian wrestled with guilt, anger, and disbelief. Part of him wanted to destroy the letter and bury the truth forever. Exposing the conspiracy would disgrace his family name and shake powerful alliances throughout the kingdom. Yet every time temptation appeared, he thought of Florence. He thought of the father she had lost, the childhood stolen from her, and the years spent living under undeserved shame. By dawn, his decision was made. Truth mattered more than reputation. The next morning, he found Florence in the castle gardens. She stood beside a row of blooming roses, trimming damaged branches while sunlight illuminated her hair. The peaceful scene made what he had to do even harder. When she noticed him approaching, she smiled, and the sight nearly broke his heart. She trusted him now, and he had no idea how she would react once she learned the truth. "Adrian," she asked softly. Without answering, he stopped before her, and then he did something no one present would ever forget. He knelt. The most powerful duke in the country lowered himself onto one knee before his wife. Florence stared at him in shock. "Adrian, what are you doing?" His voice trembled. "For the first time in my life, I am trying to do the right thing." He handed her the letter. Confusion crossed her face as she accepted it, and then she began reading. The garden fell silent. Adrian watched every emotion pass through her expression. Confusion became curiosity. Curiosity became disbelief, and disbelief became shock. By the time she reached the final page, tears were streaming down her cheeks, and her hands shook violently. "No," she whispered. She read several sections again, then again, as though afraid the words might disappear. "My father." Her voice cracked. "He was innocent." Adrian lowered his head. Yes, the single word shattered years of pain. Florence collapsed onto a nearby bench, sobbing. Not the quiet tears she usually hid, not restrained grief. This was the release of a burden carried for nearly a decade. She mourned her father, she mourned her mother, and she mourned every opportunity stolen from her family. Adrian sat beside her and wrapped his arms around her trembling shoulders. For hours they remained together and neither spoke much. Words seemed inadequate. Eventually Florence lifted her tear-stained face. "What happens now?" Adrian gently kissed her forehead. "Now we give your father back his honor." The battle that followed proved far more difficult than either expected. Powerful nobles had benefited from the original accusation, and many feared what would happen if the truth emerged. Several attempted to discredit the evidence before it reached the king. Others pressured Adrian to remain silent, and some even warned him that exposing the conspiracy could destroy his family's standing. For the first time in his life, Adrian ignored every warning. He gathered documents, interviewed surviving witnesses, and traced financial records connected to his uncle's schemes. Florence stood beside him throughout the process, and together They built an undeniable case. Weeks later, they presented the evidence before the royal court in London. The hearing lasted an entire day. Nobles argued and accusations flew across the chamber, yet facts proved stronger than influence. One by one, the lies unraveled. When the final testimony concluded, silence filled the hall. The king reviewed the evidence personally, then he rose from his throne. His verdict echoed through the chamber. Lord Edmund was innocent. The declaration transformed everything. Years of injustice ended with a single sentence. Florence closed her eyes as tears slipped down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of relief. The crown formally restored her father's title. His name was cleared in every official record, and his memory was honored throughout the United Kingdom. Even Adrian's uncle could no longer escape judgment. The conspiracy was exposed publicly, and every participant faced punishment according to the law. For the first time since her childhood, Florence felt truly free. Months later, Adrian organized a grand royal ball unlike any the country had seen in years. Nobles traveled from distant provinces, foreign dignitaries attended, and musicians filled the magnificent hall with elegant melodies. Golden chandeliers illuminated hundreds of guests, yet Adrian's attention remained fixed on one person, Florence. She entered wearing a gown worthy of her restored heritage. Though it was not the dress that captured everyone's attention, it was her confidence. The quiet young woman, once dismissed as a disgraced noble's daughter, now carried herself with unmistakable grace. As the evening reached its height, Adrian took her hand and led her to the center of the ballroom. Conversations faded, and the crowd watched expectantly. Many remembered another gathering years earlier. Many remembered another public declaration. Adrian faced the assembled nobles, his voice carrying clearly across the hall. "Years ago, I said I was embarrassed to call this woman my wife." The room became silent, and Florence's eyes widened slightly. Adrian turned toward her, and warmth filled his expression. "The truth is that I was blind." Emotion tightened his throat. "Today she is the greatest honor of my life." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then applause erupted throughout the ballroom. The sound grew louder and louder until it filled every corner of the hall. Tears shimmered in Florence's eyes, not from sorrow, not from humiliation, but from happiness. Adrian gently pulled her closer. Under the glow of golden chandeliers and before the entire United Kingdom, he kissed her. The crowd cheered, and the moment felt like the closing of a wound that had remained open for years. Much later, when the music softened and the celebration continued around them, Florence rested her head against Adrian's shoulder. The future stretched before them at last, a future built not on obligation but on love, a future made possible by one forgotten letter, one painful truth, and two people willing to choose forgiveness over bitterness. And though neither of them knew exactly what the years ahead would bring, they faced them together hand in hand, stronger than anything fate had once placed between them. If this story of justice, love, and redemption touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more timeless tales. We would love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Adrian did enough to redeem himself after his public insult, or would you have found it harder to forgive him than Florence did? Let us know in the comments below.